Hey, I'm Christina Rea, and welcome to Breaking Out of Breaking In, a practical filmmaking podcast about taking your creative career into your own hands and making great work that gets seen without playing the Hollywood game.
Or at least while changing the rules. Hi, I'm Brie Castellini, your other co-host, and today we're breaking down comps. Before we dive in, remember that we release bonus content for each episode over on patreon.com/breakingoutpod if you want to support us and get yourself even more info and resources. But without further ado, Christina, let's talk comps.
It's good timing because I've been watching a million.
That's honestly where I think I pitched this idea, and it's because you kept like sending me messages about your comp hunt, and I was like fascinated by it. And I now also have to come up with literary comps as I prepare to send my manuscript out, and it's famously extremely annoying. So what are comps? If you don't know what a comp is, well, according to Google, who I used for this definition, comps are projects similar to your project that prove you have a viable idea to investors. Now, investors is not always the target audience for comps. Sometimes it's a screenplay competition, sometimes it's a film festival, sometimes it's an agent, but like let's just consider it like stakeholders.
Or an audience.
Yeah, audience. Because a lot of times you end up using comps for marketing. It's helpful to have like keywords of like media that people already love to associate with your new work, so that it's almost like, well, if you like this, then you'll love this. Like basically it's proof that something like your project exists out there already that will make it more appealing to people who don't want to take a risk. Does that feel like a fair definition?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so these similarities, the projects similar to your project, could mean everything from budget size, which I know, Christina, you have probably a lot of thoughts on, audience and demographics, theme, format, and even characters and story. Ideally, you'll have at least one or two comps for each of those like categories of similarities. It's not necessarily that you will use all of them. You're not going to like roll out with 8 different comps necessarily for every pitch deck that you design, but it's useful to have them as like touchstones when you're talking to people, because sometimes like people will need additional convincing, and it's helpful to have, you know, like a phase 2 of convincing to give them. So picking comps, where do you tend to start when you're like, all right, new project, need to pick some comps?
Yeah, so I guess I start with who am I picking them for, because that factors into how I go about it. For instance, my earlier projects were all crowdfunded. So when I was picking comps to try and market to people, it was very much like mainstream stuff, trying to find things that are tonal matches that'll give them a vibe. So it's like, if you're a fan of this, then you want this from me. Because most of the time, you're reaching out to people in your network that aren't other filmmakers or don't work in the industry. If you're crowdfunding, you're reaching out to like friends and family and then audience beyond that. And so they're probably not going to be like as aware of what screened at Sundance last year, you know?
Sure.
So there's that side of things. But then with my new film, I'm trying to find comps for financing. So for the production company that I'm working with, for them to go to financiers with. And so that is a very different thing, where I'm all about indies and trying to find films that didn't necessarily reach mainstream status, but did well within the industry, within their version of success, the industry's version of success. And budget is very much a factor, and just all these like nuanced things that audiences don't care about and don't know about. So it's 2 very different approaches.
Totally. So when you were making those earlier projects, do you remember some of the comps you picked that seemed to work?
Yeah. So, I mean, Summit was my first feature and my first time really marketing anything and trying to build an audience for anything and trying to get funding for it. And we ran a Kickstarter in 2012. I ran for my first Kickstarter in 2011, so I got confused. But that was for short. 2012, and we raised $12,000, and for me, that was a ton of money. And it was about appealing to horror fans. And so I just went with like classic movies that I was trying to sort of like do my own version of in a way. And so I talked about it a lot as The Thing meets Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but with like a psychological twist to it. And I think that was very successful, but it also set like insane expectations because those are two of the best horror movies of all time, arguably. And also my film ended up, I kind of like, it was a misdirect. I wanted my audience to think it was more of a slasher than it actually was. And so during crowdfunding, I leaned into that a lot, but then during festival runs and eventual distribution, I didn't quite use Texas Chainsaw Massacre because I didn't want to set the wrong expectations. But people that came from crowdfunding and then eventually watched it, I think were a little bit like, wait, this isn't a slasher. Like, it is kind of, but it's also not really. And so I ended up trying to then lean more into like, I don't know, just, I didn't use comps quite as much for festivals and distribution, and it was more just about a new spin on the like road trip, friends going on a road trip slasher movie with more of a psychological bend to it. It was a learning experience. I think I kind of failed, but it was my first time.
Do you regret leaning so hard into Texas Chainsaw for crowdfunding?
No, I don't, because it worked. And I never said, I think everything that I was saying outside of that was like, it's going to subvert your expectations. And so I didn't lie, but people don't necessarily read or listen to the nuance or the full explanation. They look for those short, buzzy, this meets that, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't think that anyone was like, I hate that you did that. They were just kind of like, it wasn't what I was expecting. Betrayed. Right. Some people were like, it wasn't my cup of tea because I thought it was going to be this very specific thing and it wasn't. But some people were like, oh, it wasn't what I was expecting, but I appreciate what it was. And also like, it was a $12,000 feature that I made first feature that I made, in the snow in 11 days and with, 10 crew members and I was 22, 23. So yeah. But budget wasn't at all a factor in that because like I wouldn't even know how to find a comp in that regard. I'm sure they existed, but like Twitter wasn't what it was a few years later. So I didn't have the ability to like say, hey, can you, and I think people are a lot more transparent about budgets on the indie level now because of how much we know about how much transparency helps other filmmakers. But then it was like you hide your budget because if you wanted any shot at distribution, you didn't want distributors to know how much you spent, which we talked about, I think, in our distribution episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like that's, maybe. And we might have even talked about it in our raising money episode, because that is still, that's still a fear of a lot of indie people. Like, I'll talk to people after a crowdfunding workshop that I'll run, and they'll be like, what if I need crowdfunding but don't want to tell people what my budget is? Like, I don't want to be transparent with my audience because I can't be transparent with distributors because I've been burned before. And I'm like, yeah, I don't have a good answer for you about that. I was like, you don't have to lie, but maybe you can just like keep it to yourself. Like, just really focus on like what you need this money for and not worry about and say like, we have other financing for the rest. So like keep it vague and just focus on like the explicitly like using the funds that you're raising in crowdfunding for that stuff. And like, maybe that'll be a happy medium. But like, yeah, it's definitely tough because the industry likes to pretend like all of this is something that you can just easily assign like, oh, that's a $2 million movie. And it's like, that's not nuanced enough. That movie could be a $2 million movie. It could also be a $50 million movie, and it could be a $20,000 movie. Like, it depends on who's making it.
Right. And so,
but then, they want to use that to, short people on distribution deals. So.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So, but that wasn't even a factor at all for me. Like, I didn't know anything about distribution, but I knew that at the very least I could put it online, and I hoped.
Did you try to distribute Summit?
I got a distribution offer from our festival run. I'm glad I didn't sign the deal. I was like, I agonized over it for, I feel like a month. And then I was going to sign and then just had this gut feeling that I shouldn't. And largely because they weren't offering me an MG. They weren't offering me money up front. It was going to be a profit share. And at that point, I'd already put it on Vimeo on demand and Amazon, because we had just finished our festival run and I had just done it, and I think that's why they reached out to me, because they were like, oh wow, it's like getting traction on Amazon. This was when you could, before we've talked all about
right.
this.
This is when Amazon allowed indie stuff coming through. This is when Amazon actually paid artists. This is
right. So they reached out and they were actually going to let me keep those to myself. And so it was going to be probably a sweet deal, but I was hesitating because they want to do DVDs. They were like, horror still does well in big box stores on a DVD. And they also were interested in other iTunes and whatever, all of that. But they had all of these really offensive exploitation films in their library of stuff they distributed. And I was like, I don't want my name associated with that. And it was such a weird thing that I did use Twitter a lot for that, to be like, how do you navigate this when it's not, those aren't your movies, but you signing with them is almost like an endorsement of them. But it goes back to everything where it's like, oh, if Disney does something fucked up, am I never going to work with Disney? And
Sure.
Your options in this industry are so limited because it's just about gatekeepers choosing you, right? And so it's you have to kind of figure out where your line is, and it may move depending on the impact, of a variety of things. So anyway, I ultimately decided not to do it because it didn't feel like the payoff would be worth it, from talking to a couple of people who had worked with them. But then a few years later, I started hearing real horror stories about them in terms of A, working with them, and B, just how they have really shady bookkeeping so that you really never see a dime. And so in theory, you might get your film out there wider, but you don't know how much it's being watched. You don't even know if those DVDs are being bought. So there would be a fun, go into Walmart and see your movie on DVD, but is anyone
Sure.
buying it? You don't know, and you're not seeing any dollars from it. And then they ended up going bankrupt. So the deals that they signed with some people that were really years long contracts ended up meaning that their film was just kind of lost in limbo for quite a while before the contract expired. So I'm glad I didn't do it, but I wasn't pursuing distribution going into Summit because I was really I don't know anything yet, and this is such a small movie that ultimately I just want to make it and get it to festivals. That was my desire, was to watch it in a theater with people. And then of course, once I started doing that, I absolutely hated that because then I watched it so many times and all I could see and hear were the flaws, because it was such a learning. It was a film where I made so many mistakes and learned so much. And ultimately, this was literally a decade ago. Just a few weeks ago made a decade since we wrapped production on it. So yeah, it was my first time dipping my toe in that water, though, and I learned a lot.
Fair enough. That's all very interesting. Yeah, so you say that you picked those comps because of what inspired you and also what you think would vibe with your audience. And I did a similar thing with Brains. I didn't consciously know what I was doing was picking comps because my MFA program was academically dubious. So all of the stuff that I've learned about filmmaking and the film industry has come after the fact, but regardless, but I was doing it for audience reasons when I was picking keywords to drop. So I made Brains at the time that web series were still pretty big. We made Brains 3 years after the Lizzie Bennet Diaries premiered. We were within a couple of years of Lizzie Bennet Diaries, and obviously that was a big inspiration for us in tone and style. And I had watched a lot of behind the scenes features from the creators of that, and so I was really familiar with their process. And so I would tell people, that parody book Pride and Prejudice and Zombies were the Lizzie Bennet Diaries and zombies, and that tended to go over well with specifically fans of the web series genre, which is a big group of people that I was courting, because that was at one time a pretty powerful audience demographic. And then I never really got anywhere with mainstream zombie people. Occasionally people would discover us, but our show wasn't about zombies. Like, we cut versions of like trailers and teasers that like just focused on the zombie parts, and like we had a handful of like fun shots, because like the one difference that we made in the production decisions was we weren't going to stay in a single location. Like, we were going to take the camera and move around, like I was familiar with doing in vlogging. Like, I was never a standstill vlogger. I was always a move around the world vlogger. So that allowed us to get like up close and personal with zombies, but at the same time, like, it's not a zombie show. Like, there's a zombie in the first episode, but it's like a 30-second bit that's mostly a joke about YouTubers. So we definitely had a challenge convincing horror people to pay attention to us, and then vice versa. People who were there for like wholesome rom-com antics were not always thrilled with some of the like, you know, zombie stuff. So we definitely, despite having like a really funny kind of like meta like Lizzie Bennet Diaries and Zombies pitch, we did struggle a lot with like people who weren't sure what to do with us. So I would be curious, anyone out there who's seen Brains, what would you explain as a comp for Brains? Because fuck if I know.
Yeah, you know, when we made Kelsey, my web series, Kelsey Rauber and I, we made it in summer of 2013. We shot Summit, my first feature, in January of 2013, and then we went into production for Kelsey, our web series, that summer. And web series really were not, like, outside of Broad City, I feel like I didn't even know any web series. So I was kind of like, I wouldn't even know about comps here. And we self-funded, so it wasn't so much like crowdfunding. We didn't really have to worry about that. But on the back end, it was our kind of like thing was it's like all of the sitcoms about groups of friends in New York City, except it reflects the diversity of New York City. And so, you know, I would always bring up Living Single, which is one of my favorite shows of all time. And it was like, came out a year before Friends. It was arguably what Friends copied, but didn't reach nearly the heights of Friends because it was about Black people in Brooklyn as opposed to white people in Manhattan. But so like that was my go-to, but then not many people knew about Living Single outside of the Black community. Like, not too many people watched that growing up who were our age especially, and so Friends was like an easier go-to. And then also like How I Met Your Mother. And I would say How I Met Your Mother was also something that we talked about because of the style of the show. Like, Kelsey on the series is always telling her friends a story and we're flashing back to it. And so that's not quite how I Met Your Mother worked. It's, you know,
Sure.
This was like she's telling a story to multiple friends at different points throughout the day about something that happened last week, as opposed to like kids 2 decades ago or whatever. But that was a comp. And then we kind of were like, but it has queer people and the main character's a lesbian and there are people of color, and like it's not just homogenous. But yeah, there also weren't any lesbian web series, and there also really weren't any lesbian sitcoms, like queer of any kind representation. And so a lot of our marketing was more about how representation is being pushed. Like it's a formula you've seen before. It's like a breakup rom-com meets a friends sitcom, a group of friends sitcom set in New York City, but it's also something you've never seen before because of this specific representation.
That's actually a good point that we should call out just really quickly, because I think that's a really useful piece of advice, is that it's not just about this is what's similar, because like you obviously have to show an aspect of uniqueness so that it's not like I'm just copying Living Single, I'm just copying Friends. It's like it's Friends but with queer people and people of color who don't make you want to shake them or do, but in different ways. Like it is important to understand like this is how I'm similar to these comps so that like you feel like you can trust me and my taste, but here's the twist. It's like it's this but this, it's this meets this, and like that's a big part of the formula. Don't just list shows, like explain how you're comparable but also how you're different. So just wanted to call that out really quickly.
Yeah. No, that's great.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about like vibe comps and like demographic comps. So now let's talk about budget comps, because I know that's been a big part of your life the past year or so. So how do you go? So you talked about like asking Twitter, like what are comps, like, you know, what are films in this genre in this budget range? But what else were you doing to try and find budgetary comps for a project?
Yeah, so I would start with films. So it was like I looked at all of the horror festivals over the last couple of years because in my specific situation with my feature Silent Night, which may have a new title, but I'm not going to say yet until that becomes like a real thing. So for now, it'll just continue to be that.
The film formerly known as Silent Night.
Yes. But I needed comps from really no more than 5 years ago. So that limited me to things that were pretty very recent releases. So I started with festivals and I looked at the genre and then tried to watch anything that I knew that was streaming or that I could get my hands on through knowing a filmmaker who maybe could send me a link or whatever. And so part of that was just looking at festival press releases and lineups, but also starting on Twitter, asking people for films. And sometimes then from there, I tried to just start with like what felt like it might be in the budget range based on the cast. Because if you see like a whole bunch of big names, there's just no way, right? But if maybe there's like one name and then the main roles are kind of unknowns and probably that's like more realistic. And then from there, I would try and do some digging because generally, like we just said, people don't share their budgets. So some of them are popular enough that like a Google search will reveal it because it became part of their market. Right. And sometimes it's like, oh, they already got distribution when they went into production, so revealing their budget became kind of a marketing strategy. But then you also have to kind of question that because it's like they probably are saying it's lower than it actually was because of XYZ. So I also started to realize that the smaller budgets had a tendency to be shot in countries where the US dollar goes a lot farther. So that's like a whole thing as well. But yeah, it became like a sort of investigation in a way. Like I had to sort of go down these rabbit holes to try and find budgets for certain films that felt like the right fit. But it really mostly came from the filmmakers themselves through DMs and just private responses to tweets I was putting out or on Instagram stories.
Did you like find producers and ask them if they would tell you their final budgets?
Yeah, or just like a range or like a yes or no, is it less than this? Yeah, because for the most part, they weren't friends, but having such a knowing so many filmmakers who work in horror and knowing so many festival directors who run horror festivals was really helpful to me because they were able to tell me if they knew for sure or if they suspected. So it's like, oh, this film that screened here or that we just programmed, because a lot of them were like, no one's seen it yet, but you could reach out to this filmmaker. And then what was interesting is like I was trying to stick to this budget for so long that I was given as a range. But then when I spoke to the producers I'm working with, and I was like, I'm having a tough time finding things that are tonal matches. Also, it's really hard because with horror especially, my film is kind of like social issue driven, even though it's the subtext. It's not like the mission of the film, but there's
right.
Subtext that is saying something. And because it's horror, it's really hard to find things because at the end of the day, the genre is still predominantly dominated by white men. Like that's just fact. Right. So it's hard to find things that feel like tonal matches and budget matches and aren't like really sexist or racist or whatever, So that was the challenge. And then they ended up telling me like not to worry too much about budget, but to try and find things that felt like the sort of perfect tonal match and maybe were saying something. And then it could be like a this meets that, where the budget is the that. So that opened up more opportunity for me, but it's still tough. Like, I don't know. I think about Barbarian is a film that came out last year that everyone was talking about, and I feel like it is a really good tonal comp for my film because there is humor to it, but it's also genuinely creepy and genuinely gross. Like there's some really gross stuff in there, and there's some things that kind of parallel visuals that happen in my film. but it's like, and it has a black woman lead, but it also is so obviously written by a white man, where it's like, not only would, I feel like no one would do the things that she does in that movie, the choices that she makes, but especially not a black woman. And so, and it also has some weird messaging about women and old women's bodies and I don't know, I don't want to spoil the movie, but there's just some stuff that I don't agree with message wise. And so that's a weird thing to be like, it's like this, even though I don't agree with all of these things, as far as just an enjoyment of a ride. The movie is sort of this ride that you go on that is fun, undeniably. It works, but ignore all these things that don't pair well with my movie and my message. So that that's a weird thing to.
Yeah, I wonder how much investors want that nuance versus if you just say barbarian, they're like, oh, cool, we're in, even if they don't understand the nuances of why barbarian is problematic. I wonder, that's got to be tough to be like, yeah, you like this movie? Yeah, I'm doing definitely that also. That's the thing I'm doing. Is it subversive to just claim the things about barbarian that you like and the things about barbarian that they like without acknowledging that you don't like the problematic aspects? Or is that selling out and not acknowledging I like these two parts of barbarian but none of these things? I can't even imagine how you would make that decision. That's so interesting.
I mean, I really don't know, and I'm kind of leaving it in the hands of this sort of go-between that I'm working with, because they know better what's going to hook those people. And I think at the end of the day, they care about the potential for a return or a potential for success of it. Whatever they're marking as success, it's probably not a return, because it's probably a tax write-off, for them if it doesn't make money regardless. But it's probably getting seen, getting some level of prestige within the genre and the industry. But I think I don't know, it's interesting, because I do think that in my particular situation, the social issue aspects and the representational aspects of it are part of the marketing, part of the draw, because it's oh, you get to check a do-gooder box in addition to making a fun movie. But I don't think that they care about the nuances beyond oh, the leads are people of color, just like Barbarian, they're. Yeah, so exactly. I don't think that they care so much about. It might be better to
just take a step back.
Right. So I've removed myself a little bit from it. I've just been watching things and then sending things that I think fit for XYZ reason. But it can also be hard because, for instance, I watched Werewolves Within, which I think was a very good comp for the comedic side of Silent Night, though it's not as genuinely scary or as action-packed and gruesome as Silent Night is. And I sent that as a comp earlier on when I was still doing revisions of the script, which technically I'm still doing, but I was in an earlier iteration of that.
Hashtag development.
Yes. And one of the bigger producers I'm working with then kind of assumed that I then wanted my movie to be more in the comedy realm. And she was kind of oh, is this the tone you're going for? I think that's a good, she saw why I said it was a good comp. And I did say in my email, I was but it's more comedy than horror comedy. But I think she then was kind of oh, then maybe we need to punch it up to be more like this. And I was no, because I think if we're using that, then it needs to be meets something much genuinely more scary, so that you see that my movie is the middle ground of this. So that that can also be a thing where you're using it because of the fact that it's an ensemble piece and it's a monster movie and it does have comedic elements. And it all takes place in one night, which is all true for Werewolves Within, I'm pretty sure, as a comp for my movie, but not for these things. And so that can be hard because you want to make sure that then the person that is receiving it is understanding where the things intersect and where they don't. And yeah, and it's I find it really difficult because like we just said, you want to show that you're doing something different that doesn't already exist. But then I found that, at least in feedback I'm getting, they kind of want me to be giving me the one perfect comp. And I'm like, if I could do that, then there would be no point in making my movie because it would already exist, you know?
The capitalism art debate. I mean, there's a reason why everything is a remake, everything is a sequel right now, and it's because no one wants to take risks because everyone's paranoid about money, and also the people who are in charge don't actually care about art, they care about selling tickets, which is, you would think, related, but increasingly so it is not, which is very frustrating. That's why it's good though, like if you're doing a pitch deck to like actually explain under the comps, like, you know, what are you taking from each comp? It sounds like a piece of advice that we can give is don't send out unchaperoned comps. Don't just send one. Make sure you have a match set. Otherwise people might get the wrong idea. So like having a couple of bullet points or something sounds like it would be useful.
Yeah. And I would say be concise. Because something that is always a thing for me, I want to like over explain. And then I think that turns into them just like not actually reading it all. And so just being like, from this,
same in this way.
boom, boom, boom. So, yeah.
Yeah, I will say I had both an easier and a harder time with my two procedural scripts for coming up with comps. So like Dead on Arrival, my script that was going around a lot in 2021, I called it a slightly less procedural iZombie with a ghost instead of a zombie. So that was one of my like comp statements. And then more recently, I finally watched the first season of Only Murders in the Building. And so I wrote, it's like Only Murders in the Building if Tim Kono was a ghost and Selena Gomez lived in his old apartment, which is not exactly what it is, but like tonally Only Murders in the Building and like setting wise was very similar. It's a not very rich person like investigating a murder in a very rich, very like established New York City apartment complex. So, you know, Only Murders, and it's a comedy. So Only Murders in the Building is definitely, I understand why people wanted me to watch it now. I still think it's way too slow for being a show that doesn't have that many episodes and whose episodes are pretty short, but somehow they all feel like they're an hour and a half long. And I don't know how to explain that. I don't know how they've done this. So I will eventually probably watch seasons 2 and 3. Is there a third season?
There's a third one coming out.
Got it. Okay. I'm sure I'll probably watch this eventually because I'm like, all right, I see why this is valuable to me as a writer. But I have some notes. And then my my other script, Cross River Case Files, is very obviously a Nancy Drew homage because I was very annoyed by the CW Nancy Drew, which is good as a show, but not as a Nancy Drew adaptation, and that really pissed me off. So I basically split Nancy Drew into two characters, Drew and Georgie, and tried to do my kind of version of a Nancy Drew adaptation in like sensibility, if not a direct, you know, play-by-play Mystery of the Old Clock retelling. Or I also called it a slightly lighter Veronica Mars. So like it's this, but with this element removed or included kind of stuff. That was what I tried to, those were the things that were in my mind as I was building pitch decks for those. And then, and now for writing for prose, I came up with, this will only be useful for like 2 people who have actually read these authors. I don't even think Christina has read enough of these authors for this to be a valuable comp for her, but I was complimented by a former publishing exec for this comp statement. So I'm going to read it anyways because it's my podcast and I can do what I want.
Sure.
Okay. So the comp statement for my book is the dual first-person POV is reminiscent of Kate Clayborne's Structure, with the tone and latent daddy issues of Emily Henry's Beach Read, mixed with the filmmaking and fame backdrop of books like How to Fake It in Hollywood by Ava Wilder and Scandalized by Ivy Owens. So I've got like a format comp combined with a tone and theme comp combined with a subject matter comp.
That's good. That's really good.
And it works out that all of those authors most of those authors share a single agent who I am querying. So it's like, hey, I'm like the authors you already work for or work with, but also they are all like colleagues. Like, these are all authors that like talk to each other. So I'm basically like, look at this pre-existing community that already exists. I could be the new member.
That's cool.
Who knows? So have we exhausted how to find examples? Because like, we talked about how to pick. I feel like we've done a good job of covering like how to pick comps, and we've done a decent job already talking about how to find. But like, let's say you've written something that like you didn't see. Like that you it's not like you watch something and are like, I want to do that but different. Like you just like had a cool idea. How do you reverse engineer a comp finding process? What would you advise someone?
Yeah, so I would ask the community, your audience. Like if you've built an audience, let some people read it because they may have ideas for what it reminds them of, which actually is how we found comps for About a Donkey. That's my second feature that I made in 2017 with Kelsey Rauber. She wrote it. We co-produced it. She wrote it like years before. She wrote it in 2011 or 2012, maybe even 2010. And when I first read it, I remember telling her that it reminded me kind of Little Miss Sunshine. Not quite, but sort of, like in the family, like quirky family sort of dynamics. And how everyone was like somewhat pretending, but really unhappy in various ways. And then there's
quirky yet deeply broken family, and it's a comedy.
Right, right, exactly. So I feel like it started with me, where I gave her a comp because I was maybe the first person to read that script when she wrote the first draft. But then when we were crowdfunding for it, it was like, I think I've talked about this in various ways. I don't know. I know I definitely talked about this on an episode of Creative Distribution 101 with Nora Poggi, who was a guest on our podcast because she had me on to talk about distributing About a Donkey. Yes, friend of the pod. So you can listen to that. So I'll try not to reiterate too much of that. But when we were crowdfunding, it was right after Trump got elected. So it really like made us lean into a lot of the more sort of subtler themes of the film, and I think also made us lean into like the fluffiness, because we were like, everyone's so fucking like scared and sad right now, like let's just make something fluffy. But we leaned into our previous work a lot, like Kelsey, like it was tonally going to be in that realm, and it was going to have the queer representation of that series. We leaned into that for crowdfunding because we were mostly marketing to an existing audience that we had already built. But then when we were in distribution, especially at festivals, we ran a whole bunch of Facebook ads. And this is what I talked about on Nora's podcast, where it was sort of a little bit of a bait and switch, where we were trying to get conservative people to come and watch this movie and find themselves watching a rom-com between two women that also was about a family, but like the family thing was what we pushed in that marketing, not the queerness. So we didn't really talk about Kelsey or even have comps in terms of like queer women rom-coms. We didn't have any of those in our marketing. It was really, we definitely used the Little Miss Sunshine thing, but someone also told us that it reminded them of Gilmore Girls, the like quirky characters and small townness of it. And so that became a big push. And I found that on Facebook, using Gilmore Girls as a tag got like a lot of traction for the trailer. So I feel like that is something that you could do, is let someone read it or watch it at whatever stage it is. If you don't really know, I mean, you definitely should not make a film before knowing some level of who your audience is and like who it's for and who would like it because of liking other things. Sure. But let's say that you don't know and you didn't do that before. That's not too late. Start with people who you think could be your audience and ask them. That would be my advice. A very long-winded way of saying that you could get comps from your audience.
Ask for help. It's so funny how so much filmmaking advice comes down to just like, I don't know, talk to people. God.
Yeah.
But nobody wants to hear that. I would also say if you want to try to do it without talking to people, which I don't recommend, but if you wanted to start by not talking to people, I'm a list maker. So I will sometimes make lists of like, if somebody asked me for like 5 keywords about this project, you know, like what would those keywords be? So like for Dead on Arrival, it'd be like ghost, mystery, roommate drama, rich people in New York, you know, like it would be a list like that. And then I would start to Google like shows about ghosts, like TV shows with ghosts in them, TV show mysteries that were female led. Like I would go there and like take it from there and then just start watching stuff. You know, it's like if you're not a existing fan of things in the genre you're trying to write, why are you trying to write in that genre? And that's something for me to remember as well, is sometimes I'll write something and people be like, oh, these are like 3 things that you should definitely use as comps. And I'm like, I haven't seen any of those. Uh-oh. I should probably watch them both to make sure that I'm not copying them and because I need to be an active participant in this community.
Right. I feel like that's what we're doing right now with the script that we're writing, because it very much has elements from things that we've each written, but neither of us have ever written this specific. It's like a dark satire with a mystery. It's like, it's a murder mystery meets a dark satire
about the
film industry. Yeah. So that's like, it's a very specific thing. So we've been watching a whole bunch of stuff, recommending to each other, trying to find elements that we can pull from and make sure that we're not just repeating, but nothing quite matches it exactly. And so it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And we're doing a lot of watching of things to find what we could say when we get to that stage.
You know what I just realized a like sort of relationship comp might be for our 2 main characters is the spy, I think it was called The Spy Who Dumped Me. That's obviously a very different
comedy. Because it's a buddy comedy.
Yeah, but it's a buddy comedy between 2 women, one of whom is insane and the other whom is kind of insane and makes weird decisions. And I feel like that could be a useful comp for our characters. And I love that movie. That's one of my favorite movies.
I agree. It would be a good comp, but then I feel like it sets a totally different tone, and like,
which is why we need to make sure that we got to chaperone that comp. That's my new thing.
Yes.
You got to chaperone your comps. You got to make sure that they have a buddy system for your comps so that nobody gets, because like I think like that meets like Ingrid Goes West is like Ingrid Goes West kind of grounds it in like, oh, so it's like fucked up. Yeah, for sure.
Right.
A fucked up buddy comedy.
Right. About the entertainment industry. Or about breaking in, really.
Yeah. Oh,
Which
look.
is fitting.
Exactly. Our branding, it's all coming together.
Yes. We'll just use our podcast as a comp.
I mean, that would definitely be a part of the pitch deck of like, we've made a podcast for 3 years about like the sort of comedy of errors of trying to break into the entertainment industry and both unlearning it and finding reasons why we have to acknowledge that it's the only way to do it. And so we got mad and wrote a script about it.
Right.
And then we can use like nice iTunes reviews as like quotes in our pitch deck.
Yes, there you go.
We're the experts
and we
on
can
frustration.
we can write it and then we can share it with our listeners and ask them to recommend comps.
Yeah, maybe you should be a Patreon subscriber. Maybe we'll do like a table read or like a first 10 pages reveal on our Patreon. Is all I have to say about that. Do you have anything else on comps? I feel like that's all I have on comps.
I think that's it. Yeah.
Because I think we've talked about all of our projects and all of the comps you have for them. Cool. Well, drama alert. There was only one piece of screenwriting Twitter drama since the last time we recorded. And it's like, I even hesitate to call it real screenwriting Twitter drama because it's Kira Jones again and she's trying to start shit. Like, I don't know if when Kira tries to start shit it counts. She did make a lot of people very angry and there was a lot of conversation about it being had. She even got Karina Aldi McKenzie to respond, so like that was cool to me personally. Roswell, New Mexico gang show up. But Kira basically was, I don't know, do you know what I'm talking about? Do you know what the drama alert is?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, basically Kira posted something about how like her basically from the frustration of people who are always like, I have a new sample, and she's like, hot take, you only need 1 or 2 good samples if in your portfolio if they're actually good. And like she said it in an obviously kind of shady way because she's trying to start shit, which I love.
Yeah.
Go off. but like she was obviously responding to this thing where like some people it's like the people who brag about being busy all the time are the same people who brag about having like 10 samples in their portfolio, and it's like that's probably too many. And like it's not volume, it's quality, and that's certainly true. And I think Kira also mentioned in a follow-up tweet that like she has sold both of the 2 scripts in her portfolio that she's been using to like get staff writer positions and get through script competitions and stuff. She's like, I only have 2, but they're really good, so like maybe everyone chill out a little bit on just like developing new content if you can make the content you already have like really stand out. Like if it's a good representation of you and your talent, then that's it. Like, you know, and I don't think that she's saying that like never write anything new, because sometimes like you reach the end of the line with a script and it's like, I've already submitted this to all the competitions and like I haven't gotten anywhere, so like I do need something new just to stay in the game. But like if you have a really good script, you know, don't feel the pressure to write 8 more just to say that you've written 8 more.
Yeah.
And, you know, everyone's mad because everyone's always mad. And it was very funny to watch, and she was clearly having a great time. So I'm delighted to hear that. Shout out to friend of the pod, Kira Jones, always starting shit.
I love it. Yeah. Is that it? I didn't see anything else.
That was all I've seen. But I mean, again, like we started this segment right as like the hub for screenwriting drama is dying. Like Twitter like has like reduced 9%, like engagement on Twitter has gone down 9% in like the last 2 months, which is major. It is Elon Musk just fired one of his engineers for pointing out that like, no, we're not shadow banning you at your own company, Elon. Nobody cares. Because like he introduced views on tweets. I don't know if everybody is like paying attention to this, but like there's a new metric on Twitter and it's views, and it's for like passive like engagement on tweets that isn't like likes and reblogs or reblogs. I've been on Tumblr a lot recently, guys. Likes and retweets. And instead of showing how vibrant the Twitter community is, even when it's not clicking buttons, which is like the whole point of a social media platform, it's not to passively engage with, but putting that aside, instead of showing that it's a vibrant ecosystem, it's showing a like social media platform in like the last gasps of air. And Elon's really upset that he is not as popular as he thinks he should be or thinks he is, and is throwing a big baby fit about it, which on the one hand I like a lot because screw that guy, and on the other hand is devastating because I miss Twitter. So yeah, I'm keeping an eye on things, but it seems like the source of drama for screenwriters is Twitter, and if Twitter is dying, then maybe the drama is dying. Yeah. Is there drama on Mastodon? Let us know, everybody. I will reluctantly get another Mastodon account because I think that the server that I was on, the instance, the Federation ship, whatever the fuck it's called on Mastodon, the one that I was on, I think went down because I tried to log in the other day and it was like, we can't find this URL. And I was like, uh-oh, it's gone. Oh, no.
I won't join it. I'm sorry. So
you say that now. You say that now.
Yeah, you know.
What if your movie comes out and they're like, Mastodon is where it's at. Get federated. # Silent Night Federation. Something. I don't know. I don't know all the terminology.
Well, it would have to be FKA Silent Night. But I think, I don't know. It's just like, who am I just going to be marketing to then? All the other filmmakers? Sure, of course, they're my audience. But like, I want to reach the annoying horror bros too, and like I don't think that
you need to join the like horror instances, the horror servers. Yeah,
I guess. It
might be called a server.
But then it's just gonna be like people complaining about wokeness. Like,
yeah, for sure. Like I think that all of these people that are like, we want a decentralized web. It's like, no, you don't. decentralized web is forums, and everyone hated those, or it got so toxic that we all like destroyed each other's psyche for 10 years. Like, we want a centralized web, at least to a certain extent, but like the people who are in charge of centralized web have gone insane. So we're kind of like waiting for someone else to, and that's something I came to. Let's just talk about social media right now, because I was having this conversation with somebody I met at my brother's proposal, who does influencer marketing. She like works in influencer marketing. She does like influencers hire her to market for them. And I was like, so what's going on in social media right now? I was like, because people ask me for advice sometimes about marketing their work, and I don't know what to tell them anymore. And she's like, honestly, it's really messed up. She's like, one thing I will tell you is that while TikTok looks like it's really popular, obviously it certainly depends on like what somebody is looking for out of their marketing. But she's like, if you're trying to just like get eyeballs, TikTok is valuable, but it's so fast that like it's really unsustainable for most people. So it's generally, unless like TikTok is your major, like your main platform, I don't actually recommend it as like an offshoot, because it's already kind of peaking in terms of people using it. Because like once everyone realized TikTok is popular, everyone went to TikTok to like promote their various things. And so now it's like, you know, garbage and chum. But she was like, so honestly, I'm mostly focusing on Instagram right now, because not only is Instagram like, for all of its problems, a mostly stable platform, but also making sales on Instagram through like the like Instagram store and like, or whatever it's called, marketplace. It maybe is what it's called. I don't know. Instagram marketplace, something. She was like, that actually still has a viability. So like people who are trying to sell, you know, jewelry, merch, stuff like that, Instagram is continuing to be a like valuable place to do that. So she's like, honestly, at this point, I'm mostly focused on Instagram for people. We don't recommend Twitter anymore. We recommend like, if you already have a Twitter, good for you. Otherwise, stay out of it. Very distressing. But she was like, yeah, honestly, Instagram is where it's at currently. And that's terrifying. But I will also say, because Instagram now has the option to directly link URLs, at least in stories, that it's becoming a more viable place for me. Because before you couldn't put, it was always link in bio, but like that inherently requires an extra step, and that's so frustrating for people. Totally. But now you don't have to do that.
It's definitely become way more viable for marketing specifically, of anything, really. Yeah, and I think that makes sense. And like the mid to elder millennial that I am, I just watch TikToks through Instagram anyway, just, you know, like the output from their TikToks. So I feel like that is kind of the central hub. Issue.
You can't link in individual TikToks. Right. You have to say like link in bio. And that sucks. So that's my current like update. But I do think we're going to have an episode later this year, maybe once things have either settled down or fully combusted, about social media, and kind of go through what the options are right now. Because it's not looking great. If I was making a movie right now, at like an indie movie, I don't know what I would do with it. Like, I thank God I have an email list. But like that's pretty limiting.
Yeah. Well, it's limiting to build beyond that. Yeah. So it's
do you guys have hope for us in the social media realm? Tell us. We'd love to hear some.
Yes, please do.
But with so much, I cut you off.
Oh, just noise. I was gonna say, like, it's hard to get even your email list. Like, it's hard enough to get people to click through these days, because they're getting so much to their inbox in general. But then to share with other people. Right, totally. But so then to also get them to share out, like, oh, tell your friends about this thing, is, I think, harder than ever.
Yeah, no, it's kind of bleak. And so I'm definitely keeping an eye on the space, because boy howdy, I don't know what to do. That's why I'm just quietly writing novels right now and working on this feature script that we wouldn't be able to self-produce anyways, because like, I don't know. It's a lot. I want to be hopeful. I want to be on set. I want to be back in the heyday, but yeah, I don't know what the industry looks like right now in like a practical way. I just don't know, guys. Well, on that depressing note, do you have any buds? It's the bud time. It's the bud time. Do you like these jingles that I'm coming up with that I definitely planned in advance?
Yes.
I think they're really going to set the season apart.
You should go first because I don't know what my bud is.
Shit, I was hoping you would go first because I didn't prepare a bud. Well, so in a stunning turn of events, Christina has started recommending me romance novels because I've brain sicked her. I got her. I get Christina into all the trash, guys. I got her into Outlander. I got her into Roswell. Now I'm getting her into romance novels, and so she's tossing them back. So there's a couple that Christina has recommended recently that I am very excited to read because I'm in the middle of one right now, and I'm like, no, you're right. This is what I'm looking for in this moment. So that's a bud. Is Christina continuing to read and recommend me books. And my other bud is my book. Yeah, Christina and I were talking about it right before we started recording, but like my first book that I am intending to send out to agents in the next probably 2 months. I'm really happy with. I was in the middle of editing it the other day and I was reading through a section and I forgot that I was editing it because I was just like having a good time. And like that's so conceited to say about your own writing, but like I love these characters and I have been so like deep in the trenches of romance novels recently, and this is the exact book that I wanted to read and I'm so glad that I wrote it. So yeah, my bud is my own book because I'm excited about it, but it's still not ready for Christina to read, so don't ask me again.
Okay. I mean, I'll stay on topic then, and I guess, yeah, when we recorded our end of year episode last year, I said I had only read 2 books in 2022, but then that like kicked off me wanting to really commit to reading, so I started in December, and I've read, I think at this point, 30 books since the start of December.
Woo!
And nowhere near your number, but considering I only read 2
That's
books
not
last
that
year,
far away from my number. My number for 2023 is 59. So like that's not that far from you.
Yeah, so I started reading like horror and thriller and mixing in some romance recommendations from Brie, but now I feel like it's gone the other way where I'm mostly reading romance and then mixing in my usual genre stuff. So I don't know, I guess I'm just like looking forward to more reading because it's good escapism when things are slow and also kind of depressing. But the other but would also be that I have a meeting in 3 weeks about my film, my first of the year, and hopefully, I'm really hoping that it'll be my last notes meeting. I said that last time, but I feel like it's progress. Even if it's not quite as much progress as I would like, it is still progress. So
they're still interested. Yeah. They're still excited. This movie's getting made because I want to watch it. It has to get made because I have been hearing about this movie for like 4 years now, and I'm like, it's offensive to me personally that it doesn't exist in a way that I can watch it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I feel the same. It's the movie I want to watch. Just like you wrote the book that you want to read. It's the movie that I want to watch, and it hasn't been done exactly the way that I've done this. So just let me make it already.
Come on, universe.
Right.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. We'll
thank you.
Talk to you on the flip side.
See you next month. Thanks so much to Kelsey Rauber for our theme music, Kaylee Brown for our podcast art, and to all of you for listening. Links to learn more about them are in our episode description.
And thank you to our Booby VIPs who are our $10 supporters on Patreon, patreon.com/breakingoutpod. If you want a shout out at the end of every episode, just like our great friends Brandy Nicole Payne, Kelsey Rauber, and Norman Steinberg.